All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar series. Today, we're going to be walking through some functional additives for medical nonwovens. I'm joined by Roger Threadgill, the Director of Global Technology for Fibers at Americhem. So just a little lay of the land before we get started. All attendees are muted, so if you do have any questions, feel free to pop those into the Q&A, and we will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. If there are any problems that arise, you can also use that chat function if anything happens. And let's get started. So over to you, Roger.
All right, thanks, Tyler. Appreciate that. And again, thanks you to everyone for attending our webinar today on, on functional additives for medical nonwovens. As Tyler said, I'm Roger Threadgill, the Director of Global Fibers Technology Development, currently based out of Dalton, Georgia, but today I am coming to you live from our Concord, North Carolina location. I've been working with Americhem for over 36 years, and during the vast majority of that time, I've been designing, QCing, researching, and developing products for the fibers industry. So we'll go through a little bit of an agenda here on the next slide. Next slide, please. All right. First, we'll take a look at the importance of textiles and medical applications, and then talk a bit about, which is really kind of the focus, what additives can do for us, why we would use an in-melt approach as opposed to a topical approach, and then also kind of dive into the world of soft, hydrophilic, and antimicrobials. Before we jump into our Q&A, I'll tell you a little bit about the company, and yeah, so without any further ado, let's jump in. Next slide. Before we dive into the content, we'll define a couple of terms. So textiles can be broadly divided into two main categories. You have your woven products and non-woven materials. On our non-woven side, we have our manufactured sheet or webbing, which is usually thermally fused or bonded. Often they can be mechanically entangled in other ways of making this type of structure. But the key thing here is that the fibers themselves are randomly oriented. So you get kind of an uneven or inconsistent structure. They're typically used in things like hospital gowns, face masks, sanitary diapers, wiping, clothing, and others. Woven structures are manufactured by interlacing the warp and fill yarns. They have different patterns and can be used that usually, you've seen things like a plain checkerboard pattern, if you will, or twill or satin. And then these are usually require multiple steps to get to the base fabric, but many textile products are constructed this way, and they're often used in the medical textile world as well. So textiles are widely used in medical applications. Some have some unique properties that are leveraged. So we can review a couple of these areas where the products are found. Surgical gowns and face masks, they need to have natural barrier property, and the textiles themselves provide some protection against things like bacteria or viruses, all the while being lightweight and breathable. Things like wound care products like bandages, dressings, pads, swabs, they leverage different moisture management properties and further reduce the risk of infection. Filtration systems utilize non-woven textiles in some medical devices like surgical masks, air filters, which kind of help to maintain a sterile environment. Disposables are another place where textiles, especially non-wovens, are used. Materials like drapes, caps, shoe covers, and other things are used to mitigate contamination. And lastly, products like incontinence products, and we utilize them there for their high absorbency and comfort, actually, that they deliver. So medical textiles, and specifically non-wovens, do play an important role in the healthcare industry. But how is the share here between the different types of products? Is it growing or is it static in the marketplace? Well, on the next slide, we have a projection here from Grandview Research. Next slide, please. Which estimates that about 32.2 billion or so, that's billion with a B, dollars in the US was spent in 2022 and has an expected compound annual growth rate of about 4.3% through 2030. Some of the key drivers is a rising awareness of healthcare services and increasing utilization of implantable goods, and also a growing elderly population. Healthcare and hygiene textiles have basically a greater than 40% market share. These are the products that we highlighted before, like medical scrubs, drapes, and bedding. In this space, nonwovens held nearly a 46% global revenue share in 2022, tapping the material functionality of permeability, strength to weight ratio, bacterial resistance, and vapor transmission. So much of this growth was dominated in the Asia Pacific region, where there were many new nonwovens manufacturers, facilities coming online with the associated government support. On the next slide, we kind of talked a little bit about the versatility. So as versatile and functional as additives or nonwovens are, there's also a need to change or perhaps add or enhance the characteristics of that textile that make them useful in the first place. Incorporation of additives enables product customization that can be turned on and off as needed, depending upon the demands of the application. Further, taking in an in-melt approach to incorporation of the additives may reduce manufacturing complexity while still delivering efficacy and permanence that generally surpasses that of other technologies. So topical and in-melt solutions can provide the enhancements and additional attributes. So we're going to focus on the in-melt side of the equation today. Next slide, please. So when looking at selecting the proper in-melt additive solution, what types of attributes of the material would be important? Well, as an engineer myself, I tend to view problems like this as, or any sort of problem really, as an optimization routine. So assuming that we've got a pretty good spectrum of materials from which we can select to achieve our desired activity, what kind of parameters should guide our choice as designers for the appropriate solution? There are four basic questions that we need to consider. What is the function of the textile being made? What is the article's environment or lifestyle going to be like? What polymer is the textile going to be made from? And then finally, what level of performance is expected? That's pretty simple, right? Well, not exactly, because each of these questions eliminates a series of factors that need to be taken into consideration. Take the third question, for example. What polymer are we working with? In that facet of the design problem, we need to consider things like thermal stability requirements, particle size, what's the filament size going to be, what are the optical qualities that are needed, like transparency or haze values. Additional considerations might include things like yellowing or discoloration concerns, UV requirements impact, dispersibility, and other performance qualities in that particular polymer. And this is really not even a complete list of the questions and things you need to consider. And each of these questions unfolds before us just like that. So when you ask the design experts, what kind of antifungal product should I use for, say, a footwear fabric in a shoe? And really, unfortunately, the best answer really is, well, it all depends. So knowing that the additive selection can certainly be nuanced, but also rather complicated, let's look at a few attribute modifiers that are important in an application like medical textiles. Next slide. So our first category is hydrophilics, and on to the next slide. And a good definition for hydrophilic is having a tendency to mix with or dissolve in or even be wetted by water. So we're looking for a water-loving material. And most of the synthetic polymers used in man-made nonwovens are derived from petroleum-based materials. So oil, right? Oil and water don't necessarily mix. How do you get oil and water to mix together? Well, you incorporate soap. So if you think of in-melt additives of this type, like being special internal soaps, adding surfactant like surface properties to the textiles, this is what we need to be looking at. There are many materials that can provide this quality, but they must be able to meet some unique challenges if we're going to try to incorporate them as in-melt additives. They must have the requisite heat stability to survive extrusion temperatures. sometimes as high as 280 degrees C or higher. Also, these additives need to be dispersible, which means their particle sizes need to be small enough to pass through filtration and not provide stress concentrators, which might lead to fiber breaks during manufacture. And what are we needing to do? Move water through the article, help manage the microclimate, and microclimate would refer to the interface of the textile with our skin, or do we simply need to make the fiber more wettable? These are the key considerations for the design. And as always, with PPE or hygiene applications, regulatory compliance is a key consideration in the nonwoven space, and certainly it is in medical products as well. So next slide, please. So there are three active modes when it comes to water interaction. Wicking moisture, which is transport of the water or liquid through the article. Absorbing moisture, and that would be transport moisture away from the skin and kind of lock it into an inner layer, or wetting of the textile. So we're wanting to defeat the tendency of the water just to sit at the surface or stay in contact with the skin, for example, or make even a cleaning or disinfecting solution fully penetrate a container of wipes. For each, these are separate test criteria that are used to define the performance. So let's take a look at the first one on the next slide. Absorbing moisture. This is also called intrinsic absorption. So here we look at spun bonded nonwovens that are treated with 5 different additive packages to see how many times their body weight in water each could absorb. And how do we derive a number for that? Well, simply we take the weight of the textile dry versus the weight of the textile material after it's submerged in water or other liquid and allow it to sit undisturbed for a minute. The difference in those systems is intrinsic absorbance, and these are illustrated as basically a ratio. Here in this chart, you can see that our additive 2 represented with 2 different synergists are added via end melt for impact. In this comparison, additive number 1 plus a synergist allows a spun bond sheet to retain the most water. On the next slide, to get a sense of wettability, we can kind of look at contact angle of a liquid when dropped onto the surface of our nonwoven textile. Next slide, please. These images show 2 nonwovens tested, one treated with an additive that modifies its interaction with water significantly versus a control additive. This puts the oil and water analogy into perspective. A change or reduction in that contact angle, which is illustrated there on the right, is resulting in a flatter drop due to the presence of the end melt additive. On the next slide, we'll look at the third transport property. So we've looked at absorbance and we've looked at wetting. So our pictures are a little skewed in this slide, but we are comparing the attribute of that nonwoven with 2 end melt additives to wick the liquid or generate some sort of capillary action and transport the liquid through the textile. And I think this is one of the more demanding tests. And as we can imagine, it's a pretty useful attribute to have in a nonwoven, this ability of material to wick water up through the specimen. And as these demands increase, the technology is trying to keep advancing to keep pace and provide even better performance at lower cost while still meeting the requirements in our technical fabrics landscape here in medical. Next slide. So now we'll turn our attention to softness modifications, which in some ways is a bit of a close cousin to our hydrophilics. Next slide. So what are the different facets of soft or the tactile quality, right? How does it feel like to our hand or skin? So where are we looking for things like slickness or cotton-like feel? Or are we looking at really drapeability or crush, right? The ease of which our textile would be deformed and then retain its properties. So these different facets can be used to impact the different facets of soft. We've had our Embrace product line on the market for several years with our Gen 1 and Gen 2 products. Most often these products are used to kind of change that the frictional property. So, you know, you want to kind of reduce friction that you might feel as you move under. or through the textile against your skin. So, and there are other ways to modify those other facets of softness as well. And we'll talk about those a bit more too. Next. So along with the soft facet, there's a couple other things we got to keep in mind, kind of like our 4 questions, right, from before. Um, Master batch, that product that we would use for softness modification, we got to be able to disperse it, right? Mix it and incorporate it into the polymer melt and form a resulting nonwoven without disrupting the web forming process. These concerns are all part of design criteria for in-melt modifications. You've got things like rheology, so we use capillary rheometry for that. The regulatory footprint again, in this market space, super important. And also, what is our concentration and our consistency in the article itself, because that directly impacts um, the softness effect that we achieve. On the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about softness testing itself. And the tried and true method for evaluating softness is really human panel testing. You literally get a group of people to compare different fabrics and rate and rank them in the series of modifications to try to kind of get a sense of, okay, well, this one's more coarse, this one's more soft, this one has a better crush and recovery. So you kind of get your human panel to rate and rank these and kind of compile their information together. So there are different facets to softness: slickness, friction, drape, crush, and like we mentioned before, cotton-like versus synthetic are all ways we can experience tactile qualities. And one of the newer methodologies is the use of acoustic intensity. When you spin a controlled disc or rub it over the specimen, and you kind of measure the sound emitted and measure it at different frequencies to kind of get a sense of how soft this material itself should be based on that sound that it's generating. Ductility, or the opposite of ductility would be stiffness, I guess, in this case, is also a measure. And you look at that by looking at the force required to deform a sample. And all these measurements are used to compare different textiles and samples in these terms. So this testing is pretty useful during the development when you're looking at the impact of different modifications. And you can do that without the need to convene your panel of people every time you want to run a set of experiments. So again, a pretty useful technology and pretty useful advance, I'd say, in the area of soft measurement. On the next slide, we've got different product technologies with different measurable impacts along with these different haptic qualities. This table's got a range of different products evaluated with the softness measurement instrument and their corresponding values versus an untreated polypropylene control spun bond textile there at the top. So the impact of loading or use rate is also illustrated. So you can see how the corresponding values change as you increase concentration in the article. And these were made by running the same material at a higher weight. And if you go back to our initial design criteria that we discussed a little bit for softness, we also have thermal stability, and as well as really the sort of the subjective tactile quality that you should be able to experience as an observer or tester on this material yourself. On the next slide, we've got a visual map that we have for our softness products and kind of shows you generally how they compare. The slide has got the same products that we had from before, but we kind of spatially show them or demonstrate them here on this table. As you can see there on the horizontal axis on the bottom, we kind of go from the superior silky to a more silky low friction side on the left. Onto the right there, you have more of a cottony textile-like quality. And then you also, on your vertical axis, we show the elements of thermal stability, which is very important, again, in the type of processes that we deal in, as well as the relative price points between those. So pretty good way to look at these. Again, it's more of a sort of a spatial view to kind of give you a sense of where the different products fall in each of these categories. So far, we've been talking about some of the most important properties for hygiene applications. But medical textiles can be modified to also potentially slow the transmission of microbial infection and or spread and help and aid potentially in recovery for wounds and other injuries. And so we'll focus a little bit now on antimicrobials. Next slide. And we can go ahead and move on to the next slide. Thanks. So when we talk about antimicrobials, what are the microbes we are referring to with the term antimicrobial? Well, that term encompasses a range of tiny organisms that when they are allowed to grow unchecked can cause many issues that we will detail in a moment. Algae, fungi, bacteria, and also viruses. These things are around us every day. So I'm sure the organisms at the forefront of the general public's mind nowadays, especially over the last few years, have been viruses. They can be divided into two basic categories based on the type of acid that comprises their genome, deoxyribonucleic and ribonucleic. They exist in multiple shapes. They can be in the form of rods, spheres, filaments, and helixes. Viruses are pretty nasty little creatures in some aspects. They invade healthy cells of the host, whether that's a human, an animal, or a plant, or other microorganisms, and they replicate and reassemble until they consume all of the matter in that cell. And then they repeat this process over and over again in healthy cells. As of today, there are not many in-melt solutions, antimicrobial solutions, that have been demonstrated to show a really quick efficacy against viruses and textiles, although there's still developments in progress on that. So hopefully we'll see some breakthroughs here in the near future. Bacteria are also grouped into two types. They're called gram-negative and gram-positive. And what do these terms really mean? Well, this kind of refers to structural differences in the cell walls of the bacteria. A Danish scientist named Hans Christian Gram devised a method to distinguish these two different classes using a specific dye. If the dye was retained by the bacteria or stained it, then the bacteria was termed positive. And if the dye was not retained or was not able to stain it, then it was termed negative. So generally speaking, gram-negative bacteria are more resistant to antibodies and antibiotics, and not surprisingly, their cell walls a bit more impenetrable, as indicated by the dye. Many of these gram-negative and gram-positive bacteria can be pathogenic in humans and other species. Fungi, which is another one of our organisms we focus on here, are sources for molds and yeasts. They are basically indistinguishable, really, until they begin fruiting, when they manifest as like mushrooms or molds that would discolor fabrics on furniture, maybe, or say the awning on your deck, for example, or coverings on cars or watercrafts. They also can impact people by affecting their skin and even their lung tissue. These microorganisms are fundamental in the decomposition of organic matter, and they also help with nutrient exchange in our environment. They've all been long used as a direct food source, and they're also key to leavening in breads and fermentation in wine or beer. So microorganisms are all around us and even inside of us. And if we can peacefully coexist with these, why do we need to be concerned about them growing on our textile fibers and fabrics? And we'll talk about that on the next slide. If left unchecked, microbes are allowed to proliferate, and we can see an array of issues develop from nuisances like odors or stains, all the way to nosocomial infections in hospital settings due to cross-contamination from textile fabrics. Microorganisms can cause breakdown of organic residues, perspiration that will lead to fouling of clothing, fabrics, and filtration products. Additionally, colonies of bacteria can transfer from one surface to another and further proliferate. If we can add something to that textile fabric, whether it be a surface finish or an in-melt functional material, we can make that surface inhospitable to the microbes and retard the unattractive byproducts and things that result from fouling of the article. On the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the two main types of antimicrobial additives. They can be kind of broken up into two categories. Organics, where you'll find things like triclosan of microban fame, quaternary ammonium compounds or quats, and even plant extracts. Typically, these additives are characterized by a pretty broad spectrum of efficacy, so they're pretty good against most all the organisms, but they are somewhat limited by their inherent thermal properties, or really, I guess, a lack thereof. Many cannot survive the process temperatures of polymers of the engineering classes like nylons and polyesters. Our inorganic additives are based on metallics, which show different levels of efficacy against different microbes. Antimicrobial activity is inherent to many of the elements in the metals portion of our periodic chart. Many of them, like lead, cadmium, or mercury, exhibit some level of toxicity when in direct contact with articles we use in everyday life. But materials like silver, copper, and zinc, for example, of the transition elements are pretty safe for human contact, as we've been utilizing these materials for thousands of years. Whether it's in silverware or currency or sunscreen, we have a long history of safely being able to be in contact with these materials. Next slide. So once we've got a design for our textile and we've selected a right antimicrobial ingredient, we definitely need to demonstrate that these additives are functioning. So what kinds of textile tests are utilized to analyze antimicrobial effectiveness? These tests fall into two main categories, qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative tests, like the American Association for Textiles Colorists and Chemists, methods 147 and 174 are really pass-fail type tests. Microbes either grow or they do not grow when exposed to the active ingredients in the textile. One of the criteria for the test is a check to see if there's sort of a zone of inhibition around the article, which means that for some distance, the treated article itself will see no growth of microbes, some distance away from the article. So that's called the zone of inhibition. Quantitative methods focus on population reduction of the microbes upon exposure to some agent. And these are typically presented in terms of percent reduction or log reduction. Next slide. Log 1 would correspond to a 90% reduction in viable organisms. Log 2 is the equivalent to a 99% reduction, and so on. The table on the left shows several of the standard strains of bacteria and fungi and their corresponding test method callouts. And some of the more common organisms for bacteria are staph and cleb, listed there at the top, while aspergillus is a common fungi that is utilized for effectiveness screening. Next slide. Now, this table contains different antimicrobial in-melt packages that Americhem does offer with letdown and or use rate with a corresponding active ingredient content. They should also list test methods in quantitative form along with the test results. And then again, out to the right in the comments section, you see some description about the solution itself. So you've got a pretty good range there. You see everything from say log 2, log 3, all the way down to log 4, which are pretty convincing. You got some range of thermal stabilities, and then we also do a little bit of commentary on the registration status for the material, which is also pretty important. Next slide. So now that we've got our antimicrobial solution designed, what can we say about this product in the market? I'm not going to go too deep into the weeds here, but there are several governmental bodies that have jurisdictions over this process of allowing marketable claims across the world. The Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, in the US, the Biocidal Products Regulations in the EU, for example, are lead agencies in their respective communities. Oftentimes, these types of additives can come into contact with food or beverages, and then these types of cases are overseen by organizations like the FDA and the EFSA. So if we're only going to market the additive as a protection of the article that it's in, and we're not making any public health related claims, we can use something called a treated article exemption. That basically means if we follow the labeling guidelines on the antibacterial or microbial agent, then we can be pretty safe that we're not going to run afoul of any of these agencies. So this type of exemption here in the US is called FIFRA, which is a pesticide regulation, actually. So that's what we use here in the US to do that. Next slide. And if we use the treated articles exemption and conform to the rules and guidelines of what the language says on the agent itself, the label, then the contrary, we can't make any claims about the ability to kill any organisms that could be construed as being dangerous to people or animals. I guess some examples of this would be claims about eliminating or killing staph bacteria are not necessarily allowable. Prevention of infections or protection against food spoilage, control of allergens. So again, basically anything that can be inferred as or explicitly states that the product will protect public health is not allowable unless you go through a pretty rigorous registration and vetting process established by the corresponding governing agencies. Now, I know probably many of you on this webinar would willingly enter into this process and have done that in the past to register your agent and article for a specific healthcare purpose. But if you're trying to avoid that, then you need to stick to the treated article exemption. But if you do want to pursue that, we certainly can help you support your efforts there when it comes to that registration with data and information. On the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the selection and use of the right in-melt solution and what that can actually do for us. If we got the right functionality and we look at the usefulness and lifespan of the article that we're treating, the fact that we have different applications that can benefit really are only limited by our own imaginations. So if we're dealing with things like clothing or shoes or medical textiles in this case, which has been our focus today, automotive interiors or toothbrushes, many of the surfaces that we touch as humans every day can be improved by modifying its performance in many applications. So if you're wondering about a specific application for a textile or any other plastic article for that matter, let's get together and have a conversation and explore the possibilities. We got a list of different additives here today and some other useful properties in the healthcare space that might be applicable will be something like a hydrophobic. It's kind of the opposite of hydrophilic. Also very similar in this area is alcohol repellent. Very useful in and of itself against alcohol in the medical space, but also functions as a really good surrogate for many low surface energy fluids like bloods or other bodily fluids. Alcohol repellent technologies are pretty highly sought after at this moment in all plastic applications as well, because traditionally we've used materials that are kind of on the hit list for environmental regulatory agencies. PFAS chemicals, perfluoroalkyl sulfonates, and like materials like Teflon or PTFE. Yeah, they're very useful for low surface energy liquid repellents. But I'm pretty sure all of you know that they are under extreme regulatory pressure. And we're certainly trying to find new ways to be able to modify polymers and find suitable replacements for that. And we continue that work at Americhem as well. And really in the big of a pretty good development effort on that right now. So yeah, I guess that wraps up the technical portion of our presentation today. But before we take some questions, I want to take a little opportunity to share some information with you about the company. Next slide. Americhem is a global partner to, I'm sure, many of the companies present on this webinar and also other countries around the world. We specialize in performance master batch and fully compounded polymer products. As a founding principle, our company is focused on optimizing performance through innovative solutions, all while earning our customers' trust. Americhem has done this pretty effectively for over the last 80 years, and no, I haven't been around for all of those years, but been around for a lot of them. The products for healthcare textiles discussed today, as well as the solutions we provide, are available thanks to over 1,000 very talented people. That really is Americhem. Our goal is to transform the way your product looks, feels, processes, and how it will perform in its unique application. Next slide. So we also have illustrated here a few of the major industries that leverage the unique properties of manufactured fiber. Many of you in attendance in the webinar, I'm sure, operate in some of these markets and fully understand how demanding the requirements of today's consumer is. So while the focus today was on in-melt additive applications in healthcare, nonwovens, many of these chemistries that we've discussed can also be adapted to suit other areas as well. In support of this activity, Americhem's got over 30 years of experience as an industry leader in the fiber space, offering a wide array of color and additives matched to deliver on the requirements for carpet, turf, apparel, and other textile-based applications. Next slide. Americhem's offerings in synthetic fibers encompass several branded product families. And while the diversity is evident in the wide array of end uses, a unifying need in this space is to deliver affordable innovation that drives customer preference. So whether you operate in a market in a demanding, durable, long-term product space like for carpet, or you're in the single-use disposable space, something like a face mask, you're meeting or exceeding your customers' expectations requires manufacturers such as yourselves that will unify a complex set of variables, tracing all the way back to the incoming raw material. So hopefully you'll remember our brands and reach out and touch us if you have something along those lines. All right, next. Americhem really is built on technology. We have 4 main pillars for our technology. With master batch technology, which is certainly the space that I operate in, along with our functional technology. You know, again, we're talking about additive modifications of performance through additives. And then also we have our engineered compounds division and performance compounds divisions. So if you're looking for something a little more technical and even has some little different requirements, then we certainly can help you guys out with that as well. All right, next slide. So I really appreciate your time and attention today. I'd like to thank Tyler and our marketing team for hosting our presentation. So with that, I'll pause here and we'll take some questions and see if there's anything here that we didn't cover, or if there may be some other related topics that you'd like to cover. Tyler, I'll kick it to you.
Yeah, all right. Thanks, Roger. Great overview of the fibers market in general. We do have a few questions here. I know the Q&A function wasn't working properly, so if you do have any more questions, you can pop those into the chat. We have about 5 minutes, so we'll try to get through as many as we can, but if there are any that are unanswered, we will follow up with an email to everyone. So first question, this pertains to hydrophilic additives. Which is the highest BW, NW that Americhem has tried and or would recommend?
What was the first part of that?
Which is the highest? It's an acronym. It's just BW, NW.
BW and W. Sorry to say I'm not familiar with that term, so I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to there. But we have multiple different packages in the hydrophilic space, and continuing to look at that space, looking for even higher heat stability so that we can expand into other spaces, more melt blown process temperatures, polyester polymer process temperatures, things like that. So continue to try to bring that attribute into those product lines as well. So give me a little more color. Whoever put that question in, a little more color around those acronyms, I'll certainly try to respond more completely to that via email.
Okay, sounds good. This next one also pertains to hydrophilic. When is it possible to see the hydrophilic effect after production? Is some time needed or aging?
Yeah, there can be different packages perform different ways. Sometimes it's right off the line, you have the activity there. And you can see it depending upon the type of chemistry you're using. But then also some materials do require some time to bloom and migrate more towards the surface to become active. So really depends upon the package, depends upon the need. I'm sure we can try to find a solution that would work in either case.
Right, sounds good. Thank you. Next question, can multiple additives be combined into one master batch, or do you recommend using multiple master batches?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. One of the things that we kind of I guess, look at as a claim to fame would be the ability to do multi-attribute in the same concentrate. A lot of advantages to that. A lot of our customers we work with don't have multiple feeders over a line. In fact, sometimes they only have maybe two. So that would be a resin plus one additive. And so we can combine many of the additives that we discussed today into one package. We do a lot with color in combination with all of those types of attributes. So that's not necessarily a limitation. More than happy to provide these as separate as well. There could be some advantages to that, give you more flexibility to change ratio depending upon the product needs. So, but certainly, if you're looking for multifunction in one additive solution, that is something we can provide.
All right, sounds good. This next one is more on the sustainability topic. How is Americhem innovating in the sustainability of nonwovens, particularly in balancing performance requirements with recycling and biodegradability?
Great question. Certainly some activity on the research side in biodegradable polymers and also biodegradable additives. So the solution that we're looking for there is to prevent the accumulation of plastics in the environment. If we can get the materials to break down and readily convert into something that is usable in the environment, and you can attack that two ways. You can try to promote degradation in your standard polymer solution, or you can try to look at another polymer and then see if you can make that polymer work in the standard process equipment that is had in the industry today. A lot of work on compatibilization where you have multiple polymers in the same stream. So you want to, for example, try to make maybe you've got an article that's a polyethylene film that is laminated onto a polypropylene nonwoven scrim or something like that, and you want to be able to recycle that into one stream. There's certainly some compatibilization agents that can be utilized for that purpose. I'd be happy to talk with folks about that as well. So I guess those are the main areas. We're always on the lookout for more natural solutions. Kind of touched on that a little bit with the botanicals approach and antimicrobial activity, more natural based, and then a lot of the soft type materials and other materials are also plant based, more natural.
Sounds good. Looks like we have time for just one more. So this is also more of a sustainability topic. Does Americhem have a timeline for when a PFAS alternative alcohol repellent chemistry will be available?
We are looking at this point based on the product development cycle that we're in. I believe we are going to be in a position to bring a product into the marketplace beginning of 2026. We are doing more investigative work there. So we may have kind of like our softness products where we had Gen 1, Gen 2. We may be in a position where we're going to generate a series of products to introduce for the non-PFAS alcohol repellency as well. So stay tuned. We may have some more information on that coming out in a future webinar.
Okay. Excellent. And that ends us right on time. So thank you all for joining. Thank you, Roger, for the excellent presentation. We hope that you all enjoyed and learned something new about Americhem or just fibers overall. And stay tuned for some more webinar series from Americhem. So thank you and have a great day, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everybody.